when people apply for a job in your organization, and when you had a great campaign, maybe you have a good employer's brand, sometimes you might know the situation that there are more applications that you can handle. And when that situation happens, you wonder, is it the best way to do it via email or maybe via phone or via text? Or maybe we should have one of these websites, one of these portals where people have to log in and then apply via a certain formula. So they have to fill out a certain form, send it off, and then they get in touch with us, or we get in touch with them afterwards. But the question now is, and that comes directly from the podcast I made last week. After last week's podcast, I had a chat with someone who asked the question, are these portals useful? Because they said, I'm not really sure if it's personal enough. Doesn't it put people off? How many questions should I ask? What do I actually should ask? And there were many questions around these application portals where people can apply for a certain job. So that's the topic of this week. Of course, I can understand the idea behind having one of these portals, one of these websites, one of these application forms, because HR normally is understaffed. The daily business already keeps them very busy, and suddenly all the applications should be done on the side. However, you, of course, have an understandable wish to be more efficient and more effective. Still, when I see many of these portals, and now we have to distinguish between the ones doing it right or doing it wrong, when I see these portals and I often ask, what do you do afterwards? And they say, well, it's easier to say no to someone because we can filter. So I asked them, what do you filter? And that was a mid-sized business, lots of craftsmanship needed, some engineers needed, quite the national, people working on-site, online, remote, virtual, really everything. And there's a lot of client contact involved. So I asked, what is really important? When do you say no? And then the answer was, well, we look at how many applicants we get. Then we see what's in the website, what's in the database of the website, which is connected to the website. And then we put in certain filters. So I asked for an example, and they said, well, last time we had enough people applying due to the pandemic and everything. We had some people who applied, which we didn't expect them to do. So we looked at it and said, well, we decided anyone, because we needed people who we can properly train, a bit of a junior position here. So they decided to say no automatically with an automated response to anyone who does not have A-levels. I'm still shaking my head in disbelief about such decisions in organizations when people say, we say no to anyone without that formal degree, because it simply does not lead to the result you think it does. When you look at formal degrees, the first thing you can derive from that is not practical knowledge. It's normally social upbringing and how privileged someone is in their upbringing. There are many aspects, of course, when you say, hey, but we have a certain requirement, we work for the public sector, and the public sector demands us that we have a certain percentage with a bachelor's degree. That's okay, and no one says anything against that. However, if you only go by formal requirements, you will not win the best people, because saying no by filter activity is the wrong step to do. There's a certain reason for that. Often the reason is that leaders told them to do so. And I give you an example from a company in rural northern Germany. Rural northern Germany, they were looking for engineers, and they had an issue. And the issue was the following. They had no issue in finding people because it was about renewable energy. It's a quite interesting field. It's a growing industry. So many people applied. However, people went there, stayed for 2 or 3 years, and then they left again. Because living in northwestern Germany, I am born and bred northern German, so I know how it is. Even when although I was born in Hamburg, northern Germany, which is a 1 million people town, I grew up in rural northern Germany in a very small village. So I know how village life in northern Germany is, and it can be quite special. It is not for everyone, very clearly not for everyone. So people stay there for 2 or 3 years to have something in their CV, and then they apply to work in Cologne, Hamburg, London, Berlin, Munich, Paris, wherever. They have a foot in the door, and then they start into the industry with real world and life experience from engineering. But they wanted to have people who stay in the organization for 10, 15, 20 years. And they had many people who did so. The only thing they never did is ask their staff what does work and what does not work. Because after they had many failures, we came to the conclusion that they might consider to ask their staff what are the most important criteria. And surprisingly, meaning not surprisingly at all, surprisingly, people came to the conclusion that what is really important is not A-levels or bachelor's degrees. What is really important is that people are deeply rooted in the region where they are. So probably people should look at where do they live right now when they apply? Are they connected to maybe the football club or the local firefighters or to any kind of volunteering work? Do they have family in the region? Is there anything they can derive where they say this person is rooted where we work? Because let's face it, when you look at northwestern Germany, Bremen area, about more than an hour away from that, it's the area with highest unemployment in the whole country. So it's not that you're in a piece of the country, in a part of the country where everything's flourishing. Not at all. In some areas, it's quite okay. In some areas, it's actually very good. However, in many areas, it's not. And the infrastructure, as we all know, aligns with the income situation of the people living there, making an average out of everything. And then you may or may not see yourself living there for the next 10 or 15 years. And after they changed their approach to hiring and recruiting, they found better people, and they found people who stayed there for 5, 10, 15 years. The main issue, and it's not the fault of HR here, the main issue is that leaders tell them you need to say no by filter. And it's often due to one problem. And then we have to look into how to do it better. The problem is called isomorphism. Iso, Greek for equal, morphism for appearance. You have some senior leader and they did A-levels, bachelor's, master, whatever degree they had. And they said, because I did it that way, it must be the right way because I'm successful with what I did. That is a typical confirmation bias and unconscious bias problem we have here. You don't know about which factors you probably had by birthright privilege because you had them and you never saw them as privileges. For example, when you're male, white, rich family, grew up in a nice villa or a mansion somewhere in the countryside, you probably had access to private education that gave you a completely different approach to life from there. But you think it's about the bachelor's and master's degree, while in reality, it was about you being rooted in the area where you work. And probably that is the reason why you prefer to work there. So now we have to look into how to do it better. So, of course, when you want to do it better, and especially these application websites and forms and portals, however you want to call them, the more personal it is, the better people will react on it. And yes, I fully agree that having a form that has to be filled out is not very personal. It's the complete opposite. It is as non-personal as it can be. So it's very important that you only ask very short questions, only the most important questions, and then from there, you establish a personal contact, for example, by a phone call or an online meeting. And by the way, and I have to address that because it's now coming to Europe more and more, it came from the US. I see more and more of these application portals, websites, forms, entry forms, mobile apps, whatever you have there, which have voluntary questions. So questions where you don't have to answer, and you wonder, why should someone actually ask a question that is voluntary? And I can tell you why. The so-called voluntary questions were, and a luxury shopping institution, let's just put it that way, a luxury retailer in the UK did that as well. These voluntary questions were, for example, what is your marital status and what is the family planning? Do you plan to have any additional family? And what religion are you? Are you a practicing religion person? How important are religious holidays for you? And of course, questions like sexual orientation. What is your partner, gender identity, age, etc., etc. So many of these voluntary questions suddenly, and of course, organization always say you don't have to fill it out because some people might, of course, see what you're pointing at. Some people know when I write down I want to have more children, you will not hire me. So I leave it empty. But that doesn't work because other people who know the advantage of putting down I don't want to have any additional children in the future, they will put it in. So you can easily filter by the people who did not fill these questions out. So it is shady to put it into the most polite words, shady and dodgy to ask these voluntary questions where you're very clearly overstepping the mark. And by the way, if we have listeners from Europe here, in many European countries, these questions, even when asked voluntarily, are illegal. So look into the law. Just to conclude with these voluntary question nonsense, it is deeply unethical and deeply immoral to ask these questions. So, and by the way, when you want to get in contact with people, open channels, but also serve these channels. When I spoke at the HR fair that we had, the staffing fair we had just recently in Germany, 2 different staffing fairs of 2 days each, I gave different speeches on both of them. We have to see that when you open a channel, for example, Instagram or Twitter or your Facebook page or your LinkedIn page, whatever it is, when people mail you there, send you a message over there, you have to answer them in a reasonable amount of time, meaning from Monday to Friday, probably same day or next day at the very latest. And of course, I can give you examples from organizations where it worked very well and organizations where it didn't work at all, because some organizations say we don't have the power, we don't have the people, we don't have the staffing to answer these messages. Well, then please do not open the channel. During this expo, which I told you about, there were a couple of engineers, and when they were asked, how did you find your employer? They said, well, we saw their programs and we saw what they do on Instagram. And I just texted them on Instagram, and I was positively surprised to get an immediate answer within less than an hour. And after having a couple of questions back and forth, the person from the employer just said, hey, let's have a chat. Here's my phone number. Just call me. And they took it from there, and it was very successful. So you see here that opening a channel gives you direct access to people who are interested in what you do. However, you must be able to communicate with them. And when you now say we can't, then it is your problem. You cannot open a channel, receive messages, and then tell them we are not answering your messages here. And by the way, an automated response that says, oh, by the way, please don't text us here, please send an email via this form, blah, blah, that doesn't make the cut. That is not helpful at all. There is a reason why every platform has a communication channel. You either serve the communication channel, and if you do not want to do so, you face the consequences from it. And by the way, if you ask questions, please don't be manipulative about it. I have read questions which were on an appallingly low level. Maybe it's, no, it's not me. I had my professional qualification about interviewing from MIT, and I get positive feedback on my interviewing on the podcast as well. Thank you very much for that. However, when I see questions, and I quote word by word now, a company asked, and this is the full script of the question, company XYZ had a very fluctuating and often changing schedule. How open are you to answer emails during your vacation to serve the company better and to help your colleagues and projects? This question, who will answer, say, no, don't care about my colleagues, not for me. Bye, I'm off. So first, when it's vacation, it's vacation. If you want to have people who answer their emails and their message 24/7, get self-employed external people in, because they probably will do so. That's why they are self-employed. And when you now shout, well, but they are more expensive. Yes, because they are available nearly 24/7. So be sure that do not be manipulative with your questioning, because you will get answers where you push people in a certain direction. And the only consequence will be that they will not stick to what they told you. And then you will be very frustrated because you think they lied to you. And no, they didn't. They didn't lie in the slightest. They actually were very honest with you. So be sure that to show which are the opportunities, but also what are the limitations of the position you offer. What are the times? Is there any seasonal work, more work, less work, opportunities and limitations for any position? Just be very honest, but ask in a neutral way, because if you do so and you only ask a couple of questions, short, precise, and straightforward, and then immediately ask them for contact details to get in contact with them, that is the time where you can be sure that a form or a website or some sort of portal for applications is actually helpful for your recruiting process. And of course, there's more about this available. Just go to expert.nb-networks.com. I publish weekly, but the only way how to get free access to everything I publish is via expert.nb-networks.com, where you just put your email address in. All my emails are 100% content ad-free guarantee. And of course, if you now want to have a chat with me, that's possible as well. Just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and we take it from there. If you like to talk about, because you need someone for training, speaking, coaching, consulting, or mentoring, project interim management, or even someone to host your event, be the MC there, the moderator, I'm happy to talk about that as well. However, if you just want to have a chat, that is, of course, also an option and doesn't cost you a penny. nb@nb-networks.com. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And this episode today, by the way, was a result of a chat I had last week. The questions arose, and a couple of people sent me either emails or they contacted me on Instagram Facebook Messenger. Some people just send an email from last week's podcast. And I had a couple of meetings as well where people ask a lot about these kind of websites, portals, and forms. So I decided to make an episode about it. So when you talk to me, you can directly influence what's happening on this podcast. So if you have a topic on your mind, feel free to contact me 24/7. And now it's important to apply what you learned in this podcast, because only if you apply what you heard here, you will see the change in the organization that you want to see happening. I wish you all the best implementing these steps in your organization. And for this week, there is only one thing left to say for me. Thank you very much for your time.